Hey guys, thanks for being here again. We have a special show tonight. We're basically doing a making of and kind of behind the scenes look at our first animated short that we completed, which is called the Kerakoos Lore. Started out just thinking about it as an animatic, and then it kind of became something different. We're here as a team, and on the call as well, I have Eddie, who is our wonderful video editor. We are very, very happy to have him. Hello, Eddie.
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. And we have Zay, of course, who's been with us for a long time, and she is also our art producer, among other things. She's a generalist in many, many talents. Zay, how you doing?
Doing good. Hello, and how is everybody out there?
So a little background for me. So for me, I'm a game producer, software developer, designer, scripter. I like to do a lot of different things. I've been very fortunate and lucky to work on many different projects, video games, software, over the course of my entire life. And when I started streaming Twitch, I did what all Twitch streamers I think do. They find the things they're interested in, and then they find themselves kind of incorporating that into their shows. And all I knew is that for me, I've never directed my own video game world or my own full game, and it's one of my I think one of my passions. And I've been very lucky to direct parts of a game, or to do production primarily in parts of a game, and roll up my sleeves and give direction and kind of realize the vision from directors with the directors that I've worked on. So a big part of my function has always been trying to execute on the vision, and then to think through a vision on before execution, to challenge that, to understand how to implement it, to solve problems, which is something I really enjoy, and then to of course execute and track on that. So it's given me a lot of tools in my toolkit. So this time around, I wasn't surprised after I'd gotten more comfortable streaming. We started in November 18, and that just about a half year later, I started to think more deeply about what DrBossKey is. Like, I'm DrBossKey, but DrBossKey is kind of like this alter ego of a character in a video game. I always like to say DrBossKey can, you could drop him into a Tekken and he could be a fighting game character. You could drop him into Castlevania Symphony Night or Bloodstained, and he would work very well in a Metroidvania brawler. So I started really honing the idea and the concepts for DrBossKey, and heroes aren't heroes unless they have villains, people, bosses, monsters to challenge them. And so we've been working on this DrBossKey world and continuing to work on it. And one of the first outcomes of that, of course, was then creating our first boss monster, which was Kerakoos. We did a bunch of pilots, and because we were looking for really talented artists to help us. And so there was a whole lot of spin up in terms of just trying to put together a team to work on these things. So in our first 2 months, we basically got through kind of what it meant to make a character in the DrBossKey world. And it's sort of like I would go about building up the concepts for building game art. No surprise there. So we're building these characters. We have a high concept illustrations. It's become so much more than where it started, but that was the gist of it. And we also started building the lore behind the characters and their stories. Basically, we got to this point where, as we were building up the character and we're about to go to Twitch 2019, I sat down and I wrote a series of tweets, kind of as a constraint mechanism. I think we did like 6 tweets or something like that. And no surprise, like DrBossKey fights these monsters. There's more backstory, but in a series of tweets that we wrote, I wanted viewers to be able to read the tweets in order and to get this little story. Kerakoos needed a backstory, and he needed a reason for being, and he needed a reason why DrBossKey was summoned to balance the world that Kerakoos was living in and invading, of course, at that point. And so that kind of became the genesis of sort of like the Kerakoos kind of story. And I was like, well, if we could do these kind of motion graphics, I very affectionately just started calling it an animatic. I had this light bulb go off in my head. I was like, I've got a full-time, in a very great, wonderful way, video editor who also has some graphic design chops and some motion graphic stuff. And I was like, why don't we just collaborate on doing this? And so we did it very free form. I gave him kind of the ideas and sort of the way I want to see some of the shots to come together. He very patiently worked with me because we were still kind of figuring out what we wanted to do and kind of how to do it, because we were trying to establish also a style where I was thinking first animatic, and there's very much that animatic flavor, the more simplified version of storytelling. We kind of came to this thing where animatics were just a little too simplified, so it's a mixture of finalized art, speed painted art in an animatic presentation, and then going with heavy effects on top of it. Those are the main things in terms of like how everything kind of came into being. Did you guys have anything you want to add, Eddie? Or
that it did sort of land somewhere between either, I suppose, like basic animation or a fairly sophisticated animatic. It's kind of hard to tell which one it is.
Mm-hmm.
So like I think the indicator is somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's one of those things where it where we started and where we ended was entirely different, which is going to shape, I think, the next one differently. But yeah, for sure.
From the original art that we got together with our artist Dimitri, it's been amazing to watch it come along and become not just a still image on the screen, but something that's actually moving around and making noise. And it has been an amazing journey to watch Kerakoos come to life.
Well, thank you for that. I agree as well.
Oven Feline asked, can you describe the process that you used to make this?
So we use Trello as our workflow process and our communication process primarily. We use Discord as our way of calling out things to each other. So if we need to prepare for something, or someone's blocked on something that needs help and they need to be unblocked, we use that. We use Google Drive for organizing our art and assets, and we use that also just to stay organized, because when you want to go hunt things down, if it's an emote or an animation or a piece of art, you don't want to have everything everywhere. Otherwise, even when you do have the idea, their inspiration to mix things together, you're going to spend so much time looking for art assets and even understanding which ones were the last art assets, because what we do, when we're talking about characters are taking they're probably taking in reality 2 or 3 weeks, but we're not full time, so they take about 3 months, 2 to 3 months. And that's a primarily we establish with part of our workflow process. It's less technical, but we establish the character, and we kind of have a template, right? So in order to get the most out of our art process, when we conceive a character, the character has somewhat of a bit of a backstory, some ideas, then we go through a sketching process, and the character generally has a front illustration, a combat side profile, kind of a combat idle at the ready profile. They have a combat attack, some kind of special attack that accentuates their abilities. We have a back illustration, so we know what the backside of the character is. And it also, when we think about moving images around and doing tech art in the form of telling stories, being able to see the character from behind and then have the camera looking over the shoulder is important. So Eddie, so you used After Effects, but you primarily used Premiere, right?
Yeah, mixture of the both, like 80-20.
Mm-hmm. And what you're editing primarily in Premiere these days for video editing, right?
Yeah, for all the VODs, yeah, because most effects and stuff like that we'll handle within Premiere. So it's generally for more of the sort of basic animation and certain types of visual effects, I'd move over to After Effects. Yeah.
And then we use Photoshop. I use Photoshop all the time. Not really a Photoshop guru, but I do it to do reviews of art as it comes back, because we have these they're not quite dailies, but probably 2-3 times a week. I sit and Zay and I go through the latest round of art. We look at all the changes we requested, of course, because the characters need to move, and sometimes the characters need to move forward, of course, as we're trying to realize and get to the place where we can finalize characters. And so that's it's one part technical, one part production process. And then I guess maybe a little call out, a little shout out there is we used Canva for some of the very early base animatic motion graphics that we did. And then also that's one of the easy places we keep together our brand colors and our fonts, and just it's a very easy and lightweight tool to use that is decentralized. That's the other big one. So Photoshop, of course, isn't. So I think those are the main technical parts of the process. I suppose we could touch briefly on the creative process a bit more, because that's a technical process. But real quick before we do that, what was the other question that we had out there?
So the other question was actually, what's your creative process in making the Kerakoos video? So
So let me step back. I think the creative process wise, you know, the way that I work is once I have something in my brain, like I then find myself thinking about it. It's like I put stuff into my brain and I do one of two things. I either actively start imagining how things are being put together. So I often think about the characters. I think about what I like. I kind of get close to the characters. So, you know, I remember with DrBossKey in particular, because it all started with him primarily. You know, like I started imagining what DrBossKey would do in a world, right? And you know, so it started with me just thinking about not even what he necessarily looked like, but thinking about his abilities, very video game-ish, right? So, and you know, one of the first things that that came to mind with DrBossKey is I wanted him to have a, you know, like a really cool sword that did stuff. I wanted him to have a cloak that we call the Living Lab Cloak, which is Larkin. And then you know, he has this dimensional pocket in his lab cloak, you know, and that you can put anything in there. It's very much a bag of holding, right? Like, it's not like I thought, oh, bag of holding, put it here. I just thought it would be cool because I you know, it's like as a nerd, you know, you always play those games where you find that really piece of cool gear, or you find that thing that that pushes your creativity, right? Like, oh, I've got a bag of holding. Can I put a horse in there? You know, things like that, right? And I've been a D&D and a role-playing game head for a long time. And so I often think about it. I just kind of nerd out and get close to the characters. And then from there, what starts to happen is that I start to think about the characters and those abilities. And then it becomes a like, what are they doing? Who, if they meet another character, if I create a new monster, I think of first the inspiration. Like Kerakoos was, I wanted to have these really cool sword crab legs, you know, and I wanted them to be kind of tank-like. And then I wanted them to be kind of demonic because they're tank-like and they're really fortified. And then I wanted these big tentacles, and these tentacles kind of reminded me of like Displacer Beast tentacles, but these things are like very sharp and they do stabbing, right? And then it's imagining them like at war, right? Like with these things are coming across the battlefield, they're crazy, right? And then they're doing things like stabbing the, you know, like the troops and then opening them up, like they're ferocious, right? So all those things start to like infect the way that I think about the character in these situations, because I need to make a boss monster big enough to pull DrBossKey into needing to balance this world because it's out of balance, right? And then from there, what starts to happen is that I ask questions, which are like, you know, if Kerakoos is here, Kerakoos existed. I didn't think about the reason why he existed. Sometimes what happens, right, is that I create the thing and then I see how it meshes into the world because I get close to it, but I don't know what to do with it yet in terms of how it has relationships within the world. And then I start to find moments of inspiration where, you know, okay, why is it, you know, is it one world? Is it a multiverse? You know, are there gods in this world or goddesses? Are there different, is there magic? Are there, you know, like I start to answer those questions as I build up the story world, or I just ask the questions and I let my brain just go to work over time on that. And then I've got essentially a Trello board and, you know, scratch pads and voice dictation. That's something I highly recommend for a creative process. You know, if you drive to work or you put yourself in a creative mode, just find the lightest weight process to allow you to get that kind of stream of consciousness to then drop the ideas out as fast as possible. I've got voice dictation on my phone. Sometimes if I'm you know, like things with Siri, you can very quickly just, even if it doesn't all make sense, doesn't be perfect. This isn't stuff you're going to share with everyone. This is just to get it out of your mind so you don't worry too much about the process in order to the point where it actually stifles your creativity. So it's a combination of things for me. And then I kind of think about building the story world sort of like building an igloo, right? Like, you know, when you're like, I'm going to build an igloo, and you're like, well, you're not going to start with the top bricks first, right? Like I think about it as just kind of doing passes on everything where, and it's kind of fun when you work on something for so many months that you go back and you're like, oh, here are the notes on this thing. And then you get enough distance from those ideas that then you get reintroduced to them. And you sometimes even forget that they came from you. Like, you know, like sometimes I turn to Zay and I'm like, Zay, are these your notes? you know, like, did we talk about this? And you're like, oh yeah, we talked about it. And so as you forget things, sometimes you re-inspire your process, and then that blooms new ideas that you then capture. So again, it's kind of I find my process kind of building it up around me just a little bit at a time. But also you need to put yourself into a place where you need forcing functions, right? Like if it's just for the sake of making stuff up and there's no deliveries, there's no end goals, there's no, I don't want to say just goals. You need to set something that you want to achieve, right? And a goal, I guess, works for this, right? So the Kerakoos Lore animated short pushed forward the overall lore process and the creative process, and you know, trying to develop more of a style and developing the characters. And like we created, I mean, Kerakoos didn't have, before we started this, he didn't have a reason for being, right? Like and then we created Rawl, and you know, Rawl was just a speed painted version of him, and you know, like, and then it was like, oh well, where did Rawl come from? And turns out Rawl is he's a he used to be a paladin, and he was a very devout paladin for this goddess Allura. And there is this succubus who's also kind of like a almost god status. And the succubus, what she likes to do is she likes to come to these devout worshippers, and then she appears to them in the form of their god or goddess, and then she lures them into doing really horrible things, but the ends justify the means. And then as she corrupts their spirit, she then gets them to believe that they are then they're going to become the avatar for that god or goddess. So you know, like we have this whole backstory now. That's like there's plenty of stories we can write with her as a character. She doesn't have any form yet, but it's there now, and I wouldn't have been pushed to do that had I not at least gone back a few layers to try to understand some of the reasons why the characters were in this particular place. Same thing with the multiverse. You know, not that, you know, everyone's seen Marvel. It's like the multiverse is a brand new thing. I don't trip over those things. You know, it's like it's just a concept. You know, but the multiverse gives us the ability to have characters and beings and places that are very wild, right? So the place where Kerakoos invades isn't Earth in this particular case, you know, like also it allows beings of power to take over large parts of the world, because the thing with DrBossKey is that he is often drawn into these different worlds, and the goddess also Allura, who gave him this artifact, the Soul Key Blade, and then has given him charge to rebalance some of these worlds. So there's some extra stuff going on there, but I could go on and on for that. But that's sort of my creative process. And you know, the other side of it too is when you direct something, it's a combination of, you know, rolling up your sleeves. Like some of the animations I really like, in order to better understand the animation style, I wanted to learn to animate. So crack open After Effects, look at some tutorials, do 30-40 hours, produce some animations. Like, don't be apologetic. You just don't be afraid of things. You just have to roll yourself into them. No one's ever going to be perfect when they start. No one's ever amazingly talented. No one pushes the button and goes, Eureka, I am a genius prodigy. None of that ever happens, right? Like, and what happens is that, you know, I knew I wanted to do frame animation, and but frame animation is kind of a dying art form, right? Like this isn't what modern animation really is these days. That's not, there's still some frame animation, but I also realized that, you know, if you want to do something like characters blinking or wings flapping, you only need a few frames at a high speed to kind of create that effect. And then you don't need to have frame animation for the whole character at that point. So kind of a part of where I imagine starting the creative process and rolling up my sleeves and getting into it, and where we wound up ending, you know, because that has impacts on like how many revisions we do on art, how many with the artists, how many deliverables we want to looking at. It helps us try to develop a new language. Like, oh, we need 4 frames, and we need a 0, 1, 2, 3. We need an open, mid, closed. And, you know, for the artist, a lot of times they're like, oh, I can draw these, no problem. And then we did a couple tests with like, you know, do the artists animate them? Yeah, they can do, like, I can kind of throw it together, but I don't expect them necessarily just to make the perfect animation. So again, with me personally, rolling up my sleeves on After Effects, encouraging Zay to do the same thing, you know, just understanding that when you want to direct something, it doesn't work for everything. You know, if you're gonna sketch up stick figures, it's okay. Sketch stick figures if you're talking about scene compositions, right? Like, don't be afraid to at least try, and don't let that limit your imagination. And at the end of the day, basic illustration or basic concepts, even grabbing images that I have and then moving them around in a frame to communicate kind of what I'm thinking, helps bridge that gap. So those are parts of my creative process, I think. You know, again, part of it is there's this thing called momentum that I like to think about a lot, and I've talked about it a little bit before. And basically, it's that when you're working on something, especially when you're collaborating, right? Like, it's easy to get frustrated, and it's easy to lose focus. You know, and we're all humans, and you know, it takes a long time to work on stuff, right? Like, that's sort of the naive nature of being younger and not knowing until you've done something, right? Like 2 months to work on a character, 2 to 3 months to finish a full character in a part-time basis is a long time. I mean, that, you know, you think about this, I mean, that's 4 characters a year that we're going to be able to do if we go at the pace that we're currently moving at, and that's everything kind of works and continues to work efficiently, right? So that also means that, like, if it's only 4 characters a year that you can do, I mean, we've already got, I don't know, 18, 19, 20 something characters. I've got plenty of characters I haven't even made yet. It's easier to create the work from ideas than it will be to close. And so part of the trick for me is to try not to, as I get into the creative mode, try not to always introduce every idea that I have to the team. You know, a really great director I've worked with in the past, he's really great in technical visuals and interactivity. And, you know, when you have when you have lots of programmers, when you have programmers and artists and tech artists and illustrators working for you, producers, sometimes you just have to realize that you come in, you do a focus, you try to distill everything down into these are the next things we need to work on. This is what we're looking for. And then while you can have all these other ideas, you have to, like, pull the ideas back a little bit, let the work progress forward, and then vet those ideas that you have against the work as it's changing to see what's still relevant. A lot of times we like to say, everyone, this seems to be the direction we want to go. Let's go away and think on it. Like, let's just sleep on it a little bit. Let's see if anything else comes up, because you're giving yourself time to make changes before you put in, effort. Because the other side of it too is, like, you don't want to get 2 months down the road and go, we didn't really want that character, that sucks, right? Like, and so you have to give yourself time and opportunity to do that. I think and then the last part of that is kind of getting back to momentum, right? Is that it's about trying to maintain a focus and developing a cadence so things don't become too dormant for too long, right? Because the farther away everyone gets from the thing that they were working on, the more time it takes to come back and kind of reboot your interactive process for developing that thing. And the only way you can kind of combat that is to, like, for me, there's a very instinctual thing that comes from my project management side of things, because I'm expected often to manage more things than I can actually have time to do in any given day, right? So, I mean, for me, I have to have a process where I have I call it getting itchy, right? Like, we haven't talked about this thing in about a week. What's been happening there? And are there notes? Is there some place I can go find it? Who's working on it? Oh, like, it's gone dormant. It was stuck, right? So I had this process of trying to let things not get too far away. So that's one part of it. When you're working on something, it's great when you can be really focused on it. And often the thing you want to create is going to take lots of focus, but a lot of that focus is going to take time. It's going to take more time than that initial focus you had. So you need to create reconnection points. So if you're interacting with your art team and your producers, you then are like, okay, cool. Let's work on all of the concepts first, and let's get into concepting mode. And so you have this phase, and everyone's kind of understanding, hey, this is where we work fast and loose. This is where we're exploring shapes. This is where we're exploring concepts. This is where we're exploring, base attributes of the character. This isn't time to do refined details on the face and trying to get the small things, right? And you're building the small language, or the short language of expectation. And we know that when we go through the concepting phase, it lasts for, X amount of days, usually weeks in some cases. And then we go to pencils down, and we try to ask ourselves 2 or 3 times, all right, is this it? Should we go into fine lining? Because the more effort you have to spend on something, every time you make changes after you've spent all that effort means it takes even more effort to get back up to that level of quality, right? So it's much easier when you're drafting and doing base shapes and concepting to go through lots of iterations to try to find that shape, or try to find that silhouette or that form, or the basic attributes of the character. So that's some thinking there. And then I guess the last piece, so the takeaway there, right, is create processes that your team can come to depend on. So like Zay is very, very good at coming to me and giving me the update from the artist. And like if an artist has a question, or if they're stuck on something, I can rely every day that Zay will have something for me. And if she doesn't, she just tells me she doesn't have anything for the day. And it gives everyone this this understanding that I'm only, because it's not like anyone pays me full time to do any of this, right? Like, so we're only so many days away from getting something solved, and people can come to rely on these kind of these forms and processes that we develop. And you know what, the last piece of that too is that don't be afraid to try and to try a new process, a new way of doing something, and learn from it, because not every process, the way it starts, is going to end that way. We're on like version 5 or 6 of our overall video editing pipeline, right? And I think we're all very proud of the work that we've done on the pipeline. It's no process is ever a one size fits all, and it's always, they're always kind of living processes, and they're only is maintained as the people that work the processes. All right, that was a long way to get through that. Do you guys want to talk about your creative process a little bit, Zay and Eddie?
I'll go first. So a couple of the things that DrBossKey and I try to do is we will once in a while get together for like a lore jam session. And we have always, when we're going over the art and reviewing it for our artists, we always are talking about how can we utilize it? What are the abilities of the character? He kind of touched on it throughout that chat there with, we get close to the characters. We think about what we want to see. We imagine what they're doing in the world. So I imagine that Kerakoos does not like to be called a crab, because he is not a crab. He's much better than that. And he gets very angry when people call him a crab, and he likes to eat them. And these are just many of the little tidbits and details that come about as you are doing iterations on these characters, especially when you see them go from concept form into a fine lining form. And then when color is applied, that's when the character really starts to come alive, and you can kind of imagine what habitat they're in, why are they there? What is their purpose? And that helps to solidify a lot of the questions in, I believe, both mine and DrBossKey's head as we go through this process.
Cool. I can appreciate that. And then I think, Zay, do you want to touch a little bit on like your own creative writing process and I mean, some of the process you've been developing as a effects artist?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I'm actually an avid role player. I like to create characters, and it usually takes me a while. I'll be writing about them, and then their backstory starts to come to me, and I'll begin to connect them into the story after I have already been in their mindset. I am very traditional in that I get very connected to my characters. I think like them. Sometimes I act like them. If I'm out in the front lawn doing yard work, I'm like, man, Kerakoos would just pick up this rock and hurl it over his shoulder with one of his big mirror legs. I wish I was Kerakoos. And I'm kind of strange in that I like to become the character.
Gardener Kerakoos.
Gardener Kerakoos. But I like to imagine the characters in an everyday form, and then give them special abilities that make them better than if they were just in every day in the world, better than a human. That's how I've always connected into my creative writing. When I did art, it was very driven by anime. I just wanted to have beautiful characters, with long flowing hair. Unfortunately, Kerakoos doesn't have long flowing hair, but he does have long flowing tentacles. So, yeah. Does
Awesome.
that answer any questions?
No, it does. I'm super happy to hear it. Do you want to talk at all about the kind of the things you've been learning and developing in terms of like the animations and stuff that you've been working on?
Yeah. So pretty much once DrBossKey got into After Effects, he was like, "Hey, so this is pretty cool. I really am enjoying what I'm doing with the animation, and I think that you'd really enjoy it as well." So I dove right into After Effects. I had my training wheels on at first. I reconstructed the Loki animation, which DrBossKey had already created, and that really helped me connect to Loki, which we'll be having our own little session on her someday. That helped me connect to her, and I'm doing the same thing again with another new character that we'll be going over in the future, and it has just helped me to really cement these characters into the world and what they're really there for and why we're doing all of this. I really want to play this game. I mean, read this story. No, I mean, watch this stream.
Yes, it is a mixture of everything, for sure. Thank you for that, Zay. Eddie.
Yeah, so firstly, Zay, I enjoy that Kerakoos gets crabby when you call him a crab. Yeah, no, I guess my creative process would be a little bit more sort of focused because I'm, I suppose, in the trenches with all of this like beautiful lore and all these ideas sort of handed to me, and it's already fueled. And I guess when I'm doing something like this, I very much feel like almost like a viewer that has like ultimate agency. Right, so it's like I think the way I like to think about it is like when you're like watching anime or something, you're like, what is the coolest thing that can happen next, right? And then when you're involved at the stage that I'm involved in, you're like the viewer who has that agency to say, oh well, this would be the coolest thing to happen next, and I'm going to make it happen, right? So yeah, I mean, like it's one of the main things I would say. It's that the main sort of approaches that I take with something like this, working at this stage.
Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of how you handle your own focus? Like, what does it look like for you when you get, get deep into doing a round of changes or trying to find a certain type of effects or a certain type of narrative with a shot?
Yeah, right. So I don't do much planning really. So it's all more or less curiosity based. So I would try out something and I just see where it goes generally. So yeah, it's almost like just definitely have a lot of happy accidents. I think you've discovered that, right? A couple of times. I sometimes go off the beaten track a little bit too far and kind of pepper it with pepper these kind of projects with maybe something that wasn't requested or something that like I say happened by accident, or it's all very much curiosity based. Like I say, with me, not much planning. I work really well with people who do are more organized and do sort of like have an application or a plan. But when I'm left to my own devices, it definitely wanders, and I sort of need to be dragged back in.
By the way, I really liked the way that Eddie explained that he feels like he's a viewer but has the agency to decide the fate. And I think that when you go out and take risks with these projects, sometimes, as you say, it does create a happy accident and we get something that may be even better than what we were initially considering. So I think it's awesome.
All right. So then why don't we look at let's go through and take this thing apart on a shot by shot basis. All right. So let's take a look at this.